Hello everybody. If you've ever seen an expensive abandoned car, by now, you know that it really hurts deep down to even think about that moment again, especially if you're driving a car that hasn't attained that status. You just wonder why the owners did it. At least they should have shown a little humanity by either auctioning it or giving it away. This is just not right. At a certain point, the laws should have favored the ownership of an abandoned car. If that was to happen, maybe it could have been easier to own a good expensive car, that kind of a car that can make a girl stop you at the green light and give you her phone number. You get the feeling, right? In this video I will show top 10 most expensive abandoned cars. Let's have a look at these fancy cars that were let down by their owners in a sad way, similar to leaving a child in the middle of nowhere without a caring guardian. Number 10. Aston Martin DB5 $580,000. In the woods. Really? That's the worst place to abandon such a car. It doesn't even match the serenity around it. If it was given a few more years of abandonment, it could have rotted together with the leaves covering it. To tell the truth, the tires have started rotting since the rear tires can't be seen. Once again, we see a car that went from rags to riches. This Aston Martin DB5 was rescued from this unthinkable misery. And some changes and repairs were done so that the car could be restored to its former glory. Moreover, this was the first model car to be put into production with an acceleration of 0 to 100 miles per hour in less than 30 seconds. Nonetheless, after some major workouts in the garage by some experts, this car was put in an auction where it was to fetch a price that was 100 times more than the buying price. This doesn't mean that every abandoned car is this lucky. Repairing such a car cost a fortune. Remember that the next time you think about abandoning your own car in the woods. Number 9. Chevrolet dealer warehouse with 36 vintage abandoned cars. 1 million. Maybe the owner of this dealership house was waiting for the time when possessing such classic cars would be the same as having a century-old original painting. Really, how could 36 Corvettes be covered in dust accumulated for 20 years? Fortunately, the dust acted as a blanket and protected the car's paint job from rusting and other effects. One car that was in the collection had an estimated worth of $500,000. Yep, it outshone the other Chevrolets. The discovery of all these cars was quite a surprise. Some of the cars will undergo some restoration so that they can look as appealing as they did back then in the 80s. However, one of the Corvettes in there will be given some changes, which will take more than 1 year to become the most expensive 1953 Corvette in the world. Can you imagine that? What was abandoned, dirty, and forgotten is on the verge of being glorious again even in the 21st century. Well, there's always room for the forsaken even when it comes to vintage old cars that were seen as unimportant. Number 8. Ferrari Enzo 1.1 million. This is a model of a Ferrari that we usually see in music videos, and it's sitting around without an owner. Favors should have been done by the owner to leave this car maybe in a photo shoot studio. People would have loved taking pictures beside a vintage Ferrari such as this. It was in a police impound for some period of time before fruitless announcements were made to look for the owner. The police were shocked that such a car could be sitting idle, steaming under Dubai's hot sun with no one behind the steering wheel. Surprisingly, only 400 Ferrari Enzos were produced, and this car was very rare to find. While another wrecked Ferrari Enzo was being remade to be sold in an auction, this right here, which looks perfect, was just sad and spending a miserable time under the heat. It gets better. The last model of this car to be manufactured was sold at a whopping price of $6.5 million. But the good news is, this abandoned Ferrari got itself a new home. At the moment, it's under a storage unit since nobody could stand seeing it under the sun. Number 7. Bugatti Veyron 1.5 million. It seems like the owner of this Bugatti gave it a ceremonial burial and covered it with some ash after it was involved in an accident. A clear look at this Bugatti's rear indicates that this car was involved in an accident. So, the owner thought it would be better to leave it out there than repair it. The shocking part is that this is one of the most expensive car on this list to be abandoned in Russia after the Rolls-Royce. So, what left this Bugatti in this wrecked state? Okay, so this Bugatti was involved in an accident with a car, which is just as sporty as itself. It was hit by an Aston Martin. A minor scratch on the rear side was enough to end the speedy and classy road life of this Bugatti. It would have been more comforting even to clean it regularly than to let it sit there covered in the dust and looking like a car-shaped island. Abandoning a Bugatti is like literally taking 2 million and lighting it up so that it can turn to ashes. Nobody in his sane mind could do such a thing, not unless he has a lifetime fortune to last even the next generation. Number 6. Koenigsegg Trevita 2 million. The owner of this car must be given some credit because he left this car in a parking garage rather than leaving it out there in the monstrous weather to endure some hard conditions. Still, the car was abandoned. It doesn't matter if it was put in a secure place. So long as the engine hasn't been warmed for more than 2 months, that's abandonment. In the world, there are only 3 Koenigsegg Trevitas, and one of them is sitting in a parking lot without an owner to drive. A car which is so rare and super fast should be owned with some more respect. Even the company which is renting the space out for the parking is more than shocked. 1,000 Swiss francs, equal to 1,000, is what the fee had accumulated to before the public noticed that it was there to stay for a while. Surprisingly, the owner of this car has a thing for breaking up with cars without lasting that long. It didn't even take a while before the owner bought another super fancy car and abandoned it. Yeah, it's like he's distributing his eggs at different spots, which is quite confusing. Number 5. 1967 Shelby Cobra 427 to 2 million. You won't believe that this car was discovered in a barn that maybe people thought had some other cheap materials in it. The Shelby Cobra has been housing various kinds of things that were made to rest on it, especially dust, since 1991. The main reason behind that was that the mechanic who had been assigned to fix the car passed away. Have you ever had that one mechanic you trusted so much that you would have a broken car than have a stranger mechanic fix it? It seems that the owner of this car had the same feeling, so he decided to let this car stay broken and abandoned for more than 20 years. Surely, there are so many mechanics in this world, and maybe he could have found one who could have fixed this car properly. Well, this car was lucky to be found in this condition because it could have been worse than this. The house in which this Shelby Cobra was abandoned was about to be taken down so that a new house could be constructed. If it weren't for the concern of the neighbors, this car could have been scrap metal in a junkyard by now. Number 4. 1966 Ferrari 275 GTB 2.5 million. Here, we come across another Ferrari that was abandoned in the same barn that the Shelby Cobra was. Clearly, the owner didn't care what happened to these two expensive cars, one of which was a Ferrari. The 1966 Ferrari 275 GTB was the first model Ferrari not to have spiked rims, and here it is rotting in a garage. Can you believe that this Ferrari has a mileage of only 13,000 kilometers? The current modern Ferrari models take less than a year to surpass that value, and this vintage car is just lazying around. The brighter side is that the Ferrari is just as fine as it was in 1991 when the owner decided that he wouldn't drive it anymore. It's not sagging, and the body lines are still smooth and appealing. The interior is also fine, and the carpeting and the seats have a good blue appealing color that hasn't faded over the years. This car was given a decent abandonment. You have to give some credit to the owner despite the fact that the engine hasn't been started for years. Number 3. Shelby Daytona 4 million. A supercar with a nice reputation was abandoned for more 30 years seem like a joke, but it isn't. Only 6 models of this Shelby were manufactured. If it were to relive its younger days, it could have been all in front of cameras and in big, expensive garages, but that time is gone. In the good old days, the Shelby Daytona was the supercar to even beat Ferrari, and it pains to see it in such a bad shape. If the designer of this car could have seen it in this condition, he would have never thought of going through all the trouble to make it so legendary. The designer of this car was a former racer who won some championships with such a model. He even finished some tracks before the Ferrari, and 30 years down the line, one of his 6 achievements is sitting somewhere rotting and rusting. It would really hurt him seeing one of the Shelby Daytonas in such a state. A look of this car shows that it can do very well even in the present times. The wheels especially show some hidden strength, which could be unleashed at any moment. Number 2. Bugatti Type 57S 4.5 million. Only 17 such Bugattis ever existed in the world, and this one right here was put in garage detention for almost 40 years. Beginning 1960, this Bugatti never saw the road again. After the owner bought it, only a few rounds were made, and then, it was set for misery. The good part is, it was stored in a garage, which is the least the owner could do to service it. To find such a car, especially a vintage Bugatti, in these modern times is very difficult, and this is why the price escalated. Old is gold. The abandonment came with something good out of it. Just as an old bottled wine gets better and smoother through years, it's the same case with this car here. The scarcity brought about demand. After the owner passed in 2007, the family that inherited the garage was shocked to know such a car existed. Luck struck the family that possessed this car when they heard that this car could fetch a good price in an auctioning event. Well, if everything went as expected, they could have even fetched more than $5 million. Isn't that amazing? It's just like a returned son. Number 1. 1964 GT40 to $7 million. This car looks as if it was buried alive and some part was left exposed. The abandonment is just on another unexplainable level. This car here was a racing monster back in the days. Many racing championships were led by drivers in this car, and here it is sitting unrecognizable in a barn somewhere. If you were told this is a 1964 GT40, would you believe it? Of course not, you'd think it's another ugly vintage car that just bored the owner. The car isn't raggedy. It was just treated that way for decades. If it wasn't for the efforts of some little kids trying to help their parents, this car here would have been totally forgotten. Ironically, this super racing car was found when some kids were going to dispose of some garbage. Maybe it was trashed away with some other old belongings. It's really disgusting to see such a racing car being treated as garbage and being discarded with no efforts. The owner could have sold it as a second-hand car instead of letting it stay in that worse and unimaginable condition, especially in a barn.